We will call this city council meeting to order. Please rise for a moment of reflection and the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen, Mrs. Hoover, Ms. Royce. Here. Ms. Bowling.
Here.
Mrs. Winterbauer.
Here.
Mr. Gurton.
Here.
Mr. Braden.
Here.
We have 5 members present this evening. Just as a reminder to suspend the rules on any ordinances or resolutions, we would need 6, and it is my understanding that Mrs. Hoover will be here later this evening. Moving on to amendment of the agenda, we have 3 items. Item 1, we will remove the minutes from the January 9th meeting. We will add a Parks Committee report under reports of standing committees. And we will also remove ordinance M3, which is the ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into a termination agreement with Paycor Inc. and release of Paycor Inc. and declaring an emergency. Mr. Braden.
Thank you, Mr. President. Motion that we amend the agenda as stated.
Motion by Mr. Braden to amend the agenda as stated, second by Ms. Royce. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Ms. Royce.
Yes.
Ms. Bowling.
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer.
Yes.
Mr. Gurton.
Yes.
Mr. Braden.
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Moving on to special presentations, we have Chief Sumner here regarding a Police Officer Life Saving Awards. Chief Sumner?
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. President and Council, for allowing us this opportunity tonight to present some life-saving awards to 4 officers who found themselves in 2 separate critical incidents while demonstrating extraordinary courage, care, and compassion for the dignity of human life. I know it's from my experience, police officers don't like to stand up here and be handing out awards. They much prefer to go unnoticed, do their job, and go home. But sometimes there are incidents that must be recognized and applauded for their dedication to duty, for going above and beyond, especially when it involves the preservation of human life. And incident number 1 occurred back in November 11th, 2023 at 3 in the morning. Officer Michael Castaneous was dispatched to the area of 5100 block of Carthage Avenue for a domestic trouble run. When he arrived, he got out of his cruiser. He heard screams of a female coming from somewhere in his location down a dark alley. Officer Castaneous approached the woman lying on the ground. She was badly injured. The woman had blood covering her face, dripping down her face. In addition to the injury, he determined that she was also undergoing some type of mental distress or under some type of intoxication of a illegal substance. As he attempted to render aid, the female tried to run away, kicking and screaming, resisting all attempts of help. After being spat on, kicked, hit, shoved, the woman was able to be secured. The medics arrived, administered a sedative along with some Narcan. Due to the aggressiveness of the woman, Officer Castaneous rode in the back of the ambulance with the patient. At the start of the transport, the woman lost consciousness and had a very faint pulse. Michael wasted no time performing CPR, assessing the breathing, and assisting the medic with life-saving techniques. Him and the medic continued CPR, switching on and off during the entire transport. When they got at the hospital, the patient regained consciousness and was turned over to hospital care. Incident number 2 happened on Christmas Eve, December 24th, 2023, at 1:38 in the morning. Officers Jimmy Strunk, Wesley Miller, and Ryan Goodwin responded to a shots fired call in the area of Rhode Island and Berkeley Avenue, just outside our jurisdiction in the Bond Hill neighborhood of Cincinnati. As officers arrived to check the area, they encountered an individual standing in the intersection. This person was quickly detained and found to have a handgun. Upon questioning, it was quickly determined that this person had just shot somebody who was inside of an apartment building, possibly injured or dead. Officers Strunk, Miller, and Goodwin entered the common area of the apartment building on Berkeley Avenue at Rhode Island. They discovered a male lying on the floor, suffering from multiple gunshot wounds to the chest and the leg. All three officers immediately administered life-saving techniques. They assessed the person for their injuries. They applied a tourniquet to the victim's thigh and a trauma dressing to the victim's chest and back. Officers treated the wounds, continued to speak to the victim, telling him to breathe, to stay awake, to keep looking at them while they were holding his hand and reassuring that he was going to make it. All three officers continued treating the victim until Cincinnati medics arrived on scene and it was turned over to them. So your supervisors have unanimously chosen to honor you with the life-saving award in recognition of your exceptional bravery, your quick thinking, your unwavering dedication to duty during these recent life-threatening critical incidents. Each of you demonstrated extraordinary courage and skill in a critical situation that resulted in the preservation of human life. Your immediate response, your exemplary use of training, and your decisive actions reflects the highest standards of professionalism within the city of Norwood and our law enforcement community. The details of these incidents highlight your commitment to safety and well-being to all. Whether it was administering life-saving medical aid, risking your own safety to protect others, your actions exemplify the core values of our police department. Congratulations on this well-deserved honor.
Round of applause.
Moving on to requests to address council, we have one, and that is Kate Wetzel.
Hi, thanks so much. Kate Wetzel. I'm coming on behalf of the Gem of the Community Award. This is the third year that we're doing the award. It's that time of year again. Nominations are open. For those of you who don't know, the Gem of the Community Award is open to Norwood residents, young and old, and people who show positivity in the community, volunteering, helping get projects done. So we honor those on February 29th this year at the Ventura Center. So nominations are open. If you have someone you want to nominate, you can go to norwoodtogether.com. The form is there. It's easier to do it on a computer than a mobile device. Just a little hint there for ease of use. And then again, our celebration will be on February 29th. It's free, but we ask that you sign up at the Eventbrite link just so we can get a account for food. And again, all are welcome. It's from 5:30 to 7 on the 29th. And if you have any questions, email norwoodtogether.com. Any questions? All right, thanks everybody.
Thank you. Next on the agenda, we have reports of standing committees of council, and we have a Parks Committee report.
Thank you, Mr. President. So committee report, infrastructure and parks, we met on January 8th, 2024. To the Honorable Council of the City of Norwood, Ohio, we, your infrastructure, streets and parks meeting, to whom was referred. We reviewed the permits for alcohol usage in picnic areas and changes to a pending ordinance to exclude Victory Park. Beg to leave to submit the following report. We discussed the inclusion of Victory Park as a reservable area for permits / alcohol usage. At this time, due to a pre-existing ordinance proclaiming the park to be alcohol-free, we are adding a clause to exclude it from the new rules. We hope to discuss the best usage of the park with the Legion and administration at a later date. We also discussed future street infrastructure plans. Respectfully submitted, Miss Emily Franzen, Chairperson, Miss Alexis Royce, Mrs. Sam Bowling, and Mrs. Winterbauer.
Thank you. Mr. Braden.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll make a motion that we accept and file the committee report.
Thank you.
I will second.
Second by Mr. Garten. Motion is to accept the committee report. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Ms. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Moving on to introductory readings of ordinances and resolutions. Ordinance 1 is the ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2024 for Fund 2053 and declaring an emergency. What's your pleasure? Mrs. Winterbauer.
Motion at this time to have the first reading.
Motion by Mrs. Winterbauer to hear the first reading of the ordinance. Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Braden. Any discussion? Mrs. Winterbauer.
Question if Mrs. Hoover does show up at some point. I don't know what the protocol would be to go back to this and be able to pass it.
Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. President. It would be, I'm assuming that we need this in a hurry, and so my recommendation would be to either amend the agenda to move it farther down or to table it until later in the meeting. Either one of those motions, and if she is here and we have otherwise you guys get to have extra meetings. That'll be fun.
Mrs. Winterbauer.
May we table it until we have Mrs. Hoover's presence?
Is that a,
Motion.
that does require a motion, correct?
Motion to table it until Mrs. Hoover is present.
Yes.
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Bowling. Any discussion?
Is that indefinitely until she's present?
At this meeting.
At this meeting,
You'll just make another motion then?
yes. Any other discussion? Motion on the floor is to table this ordinance until the arrival of Mrs. Hoover tonight. Call the roll, please.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Ms. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Next item is an ordinance amending Chapter 561 of the Norwood Codified Ordinances entitled Parks and Playgrounds to expand and clarify alcohol permits and to preserve Victory Park's status as amended. What's your pleasure? Mrs. Winterbauer.
Motion to have the first reading.
Motion by Mrs. Winterbauer to have the first reading. Mrs. Royce?
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Royce. Ms. Royce. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Ms. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes. If you can have the first reading of the ordinance, please.
An ordinance amending Chapter 561 of the Norwood Codified Ordinances entitled Parks and Playgrounds to expand and clarify alcohol permits and to preserve Victory Park's status as amended.
Thank you. Moving on to administration reports. Mayor Schneider.
Oh, thank you very much. I'll turn on my microphone since Steve told me I need to turn on my microphone. A couple of interesting things. One is at a recent Hamilton County, and it's a shame that Susan is not here to hear this, and it's also a shame that the previous council member is not here. He was always pushing for this Elm Avenue storm drainage improvements. And at the most recent Hamilton County Commissioner meeting, there were staff recommendations for potentially some ARPA, American Recovery Act funds, to go towards that project. And it's not a done deal, but it was very promising. And Commissioner Reese, the president of the commission, talked about Norwood and talked about the dire need for this improvement to be made. So I think we're making a headway on that. It would be great to come to you maybe at the next meeting or in a meeting in the future with more information on that, which would be nice. A couple of events that I attended here recently, and then one that is upcoming, is I attended the Chamber of Commerce, the Norwood Chamber of Commerce meeting, and gave the State of the City address somewhat, and talked mostly about economic development and community development and some of the projects that are going on and the progress that we're making. I will be doing sort of that same presentation or some rendition of that presentation, because I think my chamber presentation went too long. So I will be doing that Thursday at the Norwood Together's bringing their community. They have community gatherings in each of the wards throughout the year. This is the first one, and they're holding it all together at the community center at roughly 7 p.m. I think there's some networking or just socialization prior to that. But we'll start speaking about that at around 7 p.m. That'd be a good place if you want to come and just see what that's about. And I know that you always get some good information at those meetings. It really helps get information out to the wards. So that is actually this Thursday, 2 days from now, at 7 p.m. at the community center. So that'll be good. I had the privilege of attending Grace and Truth Church this weekend on Sunday. They had a 10:30 mass, or it's mass to me as a Catholic. It's a Baptist church. It's a very lively, great, energetic crowd. I don't know if any of you have been that's the old Norwood Baptist Church. But Grace and Truth is a congregation that has been together for 234 years in 4 different locations, but they were a founding church of Cincinnati. Actually, the church was put together before the city of Cincinnati even. So if you go down to Pioneer Cemetery down by the airport, by Lunken Airport, there's some significant, there's an obelisk and some other things talking about them. But 234 years this church has been going, and they moved to Norwood, and they have renovated a large portion of the church building, and it is an absolutely beautiful building. If you have a chance, go to one of their sermons. It's 10:30 on Sundays, but a very welcoming, open environment. They also host the Baby Bear. They have all the Baby Bear stuff in the lower levels, so they've really become an asset to our community. The pastor is Steve Ham, who's an Australian, great guy to talk to, and his wife Trish. And if you go there and you say, "Hey, the mayor told me to come here," maybe you'll get an extra cup of coffee or something. I don't know, but it's a great congregation, and it was really interesting to go there. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about the public design workshop that is coming up, and this is the walking, biking, health, and safety study that is going on. This is something that Congress for the New Urbanism is an organization that got together in I think the late 80s, and they got together because of urban sprawl. Everybody was leaving the inner city, the core of the cities, and going out to these subdivisions, which were great, right? Well, now everybody's, we all recognize how much fun it is to live in the city and all the great things that come with living in the city. We knew it all along in Norwood, right? But this group is having their national convention in Cincinnati. And there are a couple of pilot projects that they're going to present at the national convention, and we were picked for that pilot project. So they are coming in to look at our bikes, look at our infrastructure system, but look at our bike system, pedestrian systems, all of that. And they are putting together, we got a grant from Duke Energy to get this. So one of the things that was brought up, and it was I think it was quite a few years ago, was John Moore and his wife. You might recall that Jessica was at the inauguration was our MC, but John and Jessica have been involved in trying to move the city in a direction, a better direction all the time. Well, very positive. And he and his wife did some information. We're doing some information on walkability and on what the core of our downtown needs. And this falls right in line with some of the stuff that they were talking about, this type of study. Now, one of the things that has been brought up is that we don't have enough of this. We don't have enough planning and enough sort of a perspective on what can be. So this is a public design workshop. So all of you, all the community members are going to be invited to this. This is February 21st and 22nd. Wednesday is the 21st. And then the 22nd. And the idea is that you take a little bit of your time to put your input into this study so that it is ours. It's ours as the community. It's not, we should not get this and then say, 6 months down the road, we had these people come in from other cities and they came in and told us what. No, we want to put our input in. And that's what this opening public design workshop is, so that we can make it our own. And so we can say, we were heard. We told them. That might not be perfect. We might say, we shouldn't go down that route. It might be that this is about, but at least we're being heard. And I think that's an important part of it. So this is something that I'm hoping, these flyers, Noah has these, and these will be going out. There'll be Facebook invites to people. It'll be held at the community center. And there's different workshops during that day, so if you can't make it to one, you should be able to make it to another. But I'm hoping that everybody will embrace this and get involved in it. I know that there have been other plans that have came about, and we've used a lot of, if you look at the Norwood Montgomery Road plan, pedestrian improvements, all that, they're being implemented as we move forward. I noticed a big new sign on Montgomery Road that talks about, project paid for by the city of Norwood and SORTA. We've been lucky enough to get some grants and different funding, and that's all going to start. It's going to be an exciting year in Norwood. And when I say that, there's going to be a lot of construction going on main thoroughfares that are going to make it exciting. And we're going to have a little bit of patience. I think March is the time frame where they're going to shut down the eastbound lane of 562. So that'll potentially push more traffic into our city. Great for the businesses, right? Stop, buy something, spend a little money in Norwood, but also it's going to be more traffic in there. And so it's March, and then I think it's like a 90 days, and then 90 days after the eastbound shut down, they close off the westbound. So like I said, it will be interesting. Those people that said they never do much on the streets in Norwood, they're going to see a lot going on in those main thoroughfares. We've been doing a lot of the residential stuff, but people don't drive there. I talk to people all the time, and they're like, I haven't seen any. You guys talk about doing them, but I haven't seen any of those streets. It's because the residential streets, they're not main thoroughfares, but now we're going to hit these main thoroughfares. It's going to be interesting. So, and then I'm hoping that somebody's going to talk a little bit about one of the newest Norwood city residents. Somebody, not me, but somebody needs to talk about that, hopefully. So that's all I had. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any questions for Mayor Schneider? All right, Mr. Bonzo?
Thank you, Mr. President. So I don't have an official treasurer's report, but I just wanted to piggyback on this Congress for New Urbanism thing. So I think one of the reasons why we probably were chosen for this, so Alicia Locke is on the local organizing committee to help actually make that happen. And so knowing Alicia and how much she advocates for Norwood, I have no doubt that she had some influence on us getting this, but I'm sure other people did too, so not to discount that. And I'm sure, Mr. Mayor, that even while all this great work is getting done, you're probably going to get complaints about the work being done, so prepare for that.
We'll deal with it.
Yeah, you'll deal with it, yeah. But it's an exciting summer. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Bonzal? All right, Mr. Miracle.
Thank you, Mr. President. Speaking of exciting, we had a Finance Committee meeting this evening. Thank you to Mrs. Winterbauer, Mr. Gordon, Mr. Braden. Don't want to steal Mrs. Winterbauer's thunder, but just we'll wait for her report. But one of the things that we spoke in great length about this evening was the report on accounting methods and how we're going to track that moving forward. So that's going to be one of our main focuses, and we're going to be meeting the second meeting each month. We also talked about the new auditor site, which I'm working on, and also the important due dates from the Hamilton County Auditor and the State Auditor, and then some auditors forms that we're cleaning up and that we will be putting on the auditor's website, make it a little more friendly, working with Mr. Wagers so we can pay some things online. So looking forward to that as well. And that's all I have to share with you this evening.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Miracle? All right, Mr. Moore? Nothing. This is like two meetings in a row, all four present. I know, we'll get you later. All right. Unfinished business. I know it's rare to have this without Mrs. Hoover here, but unfinished business. Ms. Royce.
I guess she might be upset I'm bringing up MLK Day of Service stuff. But I went to New Vision Baptist Church, which is right off of Montgomery, to volunteer. Oh my gosh, what day was it? Last week? Because I was out of town for MLK Day. But they run a food pantry there. I cannot think of the Free Store Food Bank. Gives them supplies and they pass it out. And I just have to say I was so impressed. They run a well-oiled machine there. There were so many people that came through. And they've been running since the pandemic started. So it's crazy to say that's like 4 years now. But it was one of those things where I drove by every Tuesday and Thursday and I was like, that's nice that they do that. But I never stopped in to ask them about it. And I just have to say it's a wonderful thing they do for the community. So next year, if you didn't volunteer, you should, because you learned so much about the city. And, you know, like I said, it was something I drive by every Tuesday because there's a lot of traffic. And I'm always like, that's so nice. And then you stop in, you're like, these are great neighbors we have. And they serve all ages. And you fill out a form, but if you need anything, they're there. And they are always taking volunteers. You can stop in Tuesdays and Thursdays. But it was a great time. So you should volunteer. And if you want to, you can volunteer there. That's it.
Thank you. Any other unfinished business? Any new business? Mr. Braden.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I guess this falls under new business. Just in case, I know we're waiting on an ordinance for Ms. Hoover, so we can get past it by emergency clause. And I'm just curious, through the chair, maybe to the Finance Committee, is it necessary for us to pass this tonight? Or do we have to postpone and wait on her? Or is this really necessary? I'm just curious. At the beginning of the year, can we just postpone it till next? Maybe just get the first reading out the way? And just curious.
Mr. Skelly, did you want to speak on this matter?
Yeah, it's not absolutely necessary to have it passed tonight. It would be a great benefit just to have certain invoices that are being queued up, but obviously if we're missing a counselor, that's fine, so we don't need to.
Well, I mean, we can, 2 weeks, is that, I'm just curious if
That should be fine.
Okay, thank you. Oh, was it 3? Oh, okay, thank you. Okay.
Thank you. Any other new business? Mrs. Winterbauer.
I'd like to welcome in a new Norwood resident. Friday around 1 a.m., Cirrus Michael was born. I think 20.5 inches. He's very long, around 7 pounds. Recent picture, dad was asleep, baby was wide awake. But they're back in Norwood, doing well and settling right in.
All right.
That's
you.
all I have.
Any other new business? Okay, moving on to communications is a letter from Keith Moore, the law director, regarding executive session.
Dear President and members of council, I'm requesting that council go into executive session at your meeting on January 23rd, 2024 for the following purpose: to discuss disputes that are the subject of pending or imminent court actions. Please place this matter at the end of the agenda. Sincerely, Keith Moore, Norwood Law Director.
Thank you. Mrs. Winterbauer,
Motion to receive and file and go into executive session
for the
for
purpose,
the purpose of. Sorry, let me scroll. Of discussing disputes that are the subject of pending or imminent court action.
thank you. Second,
I'll second.
seconded by Mrs. Bowling. Motion is to enter executive session, or sorry, to receive and file the letter and enter executive session for the purpose stated, yes, implied in the letter. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Ms. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Girton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. At this point, we will enter executive session. Those of you in council chambers, we ask that you leave until we exit out of executive session, and we will also make sure that the camera and the sound is turned off. Thank you. would like to recognize that we have returned from executive session. We were now back in regular session. The chair would also like to acknowledge that Mrs. Hoover has arrived in council chambers. And I am now looking for a motion on the floor to untable the ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2024 for Fund 2053 and declaring an emergency, to place that on the agenda for consideration at this time. Mrs. Winterbauer.
Motion to untable the ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2024 for Fund 2053 and declaring an emergency.
And to consider on the
Yeah.
agenda at this time.
And to be considered on the agenda at this time.
Thank you. Mr. Garten,
Second the motion.
seconded by Mr. Garten. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Hoover,
Yes.
Ms. Royce,
Yes.
Ms. Bowling,
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer,
Yes.
Mr. Girton,
Yes.
Mr. Braden.
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Mrs. Winterbauer.
I move to suspend the rules and have all three readings of the ordinance.
Motion on the floor by Mrs. Winterbauer to suspend the rules and have all three readings. Is there a second? Mrs. Hoover?
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Hoover. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Hoover, Ms.
Yes.
Royce,
Yes.
Ms. Bowling,
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer,
Yes.
Mr. Girton,
Yes.
Mr. Braden.
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Please have all three readings of the ordinance.
Ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2024 for Fund 2053 and declaring an emergency. Ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2024 for Fund 2053 and declaring an emergency. Ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2024 for Fund 2053 and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Mr. Braden.
Thank you, Mr. President. Motion, we pass the ordinance.
Motion by Mr. Braden to pass the ordinance. Mrs. Royce.
I'll second.
Second by Ms. Royce. Any discussion? Ms. Royce.
Should we just, I feel like we should just tell the folks at home, we're waiting because this is money that we can spend through the facade grant, right, for small businesses. So I just wanted, if anyone was confused on why we were willing to wait, it's not money just in the general fund, it's money for our community and to make their facade, yeah, grant money. So it was important to wait for Mrs. Hoover to get here.
Thank you, Ms. Royce. Any other discussion? All right. Motion, the second.
I second.
All right. Motion on the floor is to pass the ordinance first by, I am not,
Mr. Braden.
yes, I'm trying to read my handwriting. I'm used to writing it, not reading it. Motion to pass the ordinance by Mr. Braden, seconded by Ms. Royce. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Hoover,
Yes.
Ms. Royce,
Yes.
Ms. Bowling,
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer,
Yes.
Mr. Girton,
Yes.
Mr. Braden.
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Do we have, yes, Mr. Braden?
At risk of being out of order, if I may, I'd like to just take a quick second to commend our police officers tonight. We had four, if I may, sir.
Yes.
We had four officers awarded tonight, life-saving awards. Officer Continuous, Constantis, Officer Strunk, Officer Miller, and Officer Goodman. And I just want to commend our police department, these young men, for putting their lives on the line for us every day. And I want them to know that the people that vote for me and myself and the city of Norwood appreciates them and thanks them. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. And I chose not to call you out of order this evening.
Thank you. My apologies.
All right. Next item on the agenda is excusing the absent member. Mrs. Hoover.
I make a motion that we excuse the absent member.
Motion on the floor by Mrs. Hoover to excuse the absent member. Ms. Bowling.
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Bowling. Any discussion?
Why is the member absent tonight?
Has there been an announcement?
There was.
All right. I know, you missed all of my great announcements, I'm sorry.
All right. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Hoover,
Yes.
Ms. Royce,
Yes.
Ms. Bowling,
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer,
Yes.
Mr. Gerton,
Yes.
Mr. Braden,
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Do we have a motion to adjourn? Ms. Royce.
I'll move we adjourn.
I'll second the motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn by Ms. Royce, seconded by Mr. Gerton. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Hoover,
Yes.
Ms. Royce,
Yes.
Ms. Bowling,
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer,
Yes.
Mr. Gerton,
Yes.
Mr. Braden.
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, this meeting is hereby adjourned.
I know we.